Next up, we have Angie Zablotny. She is a senior in the nursing school from Rochester, New York. She spent her junior year studying abroad with the School for International Training in Durban, South Africa. During this time, she had the opportunity to learn about community health, live with families in urban townships and rural villages, and conduct an independent research project. So with that, please give way to Angie Zablotny.
Good evening. Thank you, Mooj. So I'm Angie. I'm a senior. The spring of my junior year, I conducted an independent study project in Durban, South Africa, which will be the topic of my talk tonight, titled Conversations on Menstruation, South African Schoolgirls' Experiences as Expressed Through Body Mapping. So before I jump right into all the period talk, I'll give you guys a little context just about what I was doing in South Africa, the courses I was taking, and ultimately why I chose to talk to young girls about their periods for about 4 months. So last spring, with the School for International Training, I moved to Durban, which is over here on the eastern coast of the country. It was a community health and social policy program, so the first 3 months, 24 American students were taking classes on community health theory, practicum, qualitative research methods and ethics, and the local language of isiZulu. During this time, we were also living with predominantly Zulu families in urban townships outside the city and in rural villages all over the province of KwaZulu-Natal. An important side note that people are always curious about, the local language was Zulu, but most families spoke English fairly fluently. So as much as I tried to learn, I could still communicate pretty well with English. So the last month of the program, we were given the task of moving anywhere we wanted within the country and exploring a research topic of our choice for a month, come back in May, and present what we had found. So when I first moved to South Africa, I started hearing news stories, hearing stories from other girls about young girls in rural areas of the country who were missing school because they didn't have an access to sanitary pads. As a young woman, also with a period, this kind of upset me that someone would be set back in their education due to the lack of access to pads. This, along with traditional beliefs that I started hearing about that placed what I personally viewed as restrictions on menstruating women, got me really curious to hear the voices and the stories of these girls firsthand. So, come April, me and one other classmate who's doing a separate project moved about 2.5 hours down the coast to a quasi-rural village with a family that we did not know. And it's quasi-rural because it's about a half-hour minibus or T ride from the local town, which had a grocery store, bank, police, all the basic amenities. So for that reason, I did not encounter any girls who were missing school or struggling having access to sanitary pads. Not to say that it's not happening in the country or honestly all over the world, but for purposes of this project, it wasn't something I encountered. So I kind of had to roll with that since I was already there, and it just became, my goal was to just create a safe space for young women to talk about something that goes largely unspoken about. So this was the village. It was beautiful and right on the ocean. So to facilitate these conversations, I decided to use the qualitative art research technique known as body mapping. We had learned about it in our class back in Durban, and it's used largely with HIV/AIDS research in South Africa, as well as with victims of traumatic events. The idea is to give the participant an opportunity to think about an experience or a question and express it in a way that's important to them and in a way that how they sort of embodied that experience. So I loved doing this. We did an example in our own class, so I got to make my own body map. And it was a really cool intersection of the health sciences and art, which for people who know me, those are like my two things. So to be able to bring it together was a really exciting thing for me. And most of the research with body mapping talks about how it really takes the power out of the hands of the researcher and places it in the hands of the participants. And this was really important to me, especially talking about an issue of sexual health in a village that I wasn't familiar with. I absolutely did not want to enter this village as a young woman from the United States and make people feel uncomfortable, impose my own values or belief on them, or make them feel like they had to talk to me. So I felt like body mapping would be a way to just kind of present like a general prompt, like think about your period, think about your experience growing up as a young woman through that lens in this area, and express it however you would like. For that reason, this project had a bit of a mind of its own because I didn't really have much control over it, but the results ended up being pretty cool. So these are actually like full-size rolls of paper that the girls trace their own bodies on. So to find people to do this with me, This was easier said than done. I didn't know anyone in the village other than my family and the one classmate I was with. So every day for the first 2 weeks at 3 p.m., I stood on this road, which was an intersection of 3 roads which each had a middle or high school. So I stood there alone and with a roll of like body mapping paper and a bag of paints, and like hundreds of students would let out, and there was just the white girl on the street corner. And everyone like obviously took notice of me. Some people made a lot of comments or came over. And I really just kind of had to suck it up, and I would just like cold walk up to girls who I thought looked to be 14 to 18 years old and probably had a period. So I take a deep breath, walk up to a group of girls and introduce myself in Zulu. I found that this kind of like made them more interested and want to listen, because a lot of them told me they had never heard a Mulungu or a white person speaking Zulu before. So they kind of would just like laugh at me, but it got them to listen. So I would say like, hi, I'm Angie, I'm from the United States, I'm a student living with this family in this village. And then I'd throw in an awkward pause and in English be like, and I'm wondering if I can talk to you guys about your period today. And most of the older girls were like, no, and just walked away. Some girls were like, absolutely, what do you want to know? And I was like, okay. So it was definitely a range of things. A lot of people would just kind of talk with me on the side of the road. So I had like a voice recorder just do interviews. Some girls brought me to their house and their moms were like, what are you doing here? But my mama helped me find 9 girls who were willing to do the body mapping with me, which was tough because these girls had a lot of responsibility, had to pick up their siblings from school, they were taking care of the home, making dinner for a ton of people every single night. But was able to find the 9, and then along with that, I filled my time talking to school teachers, nurses, and a traditional healer known as a Sangoma, who actually happened to be my next door neighbor and Gogo, or grandma. So I've pulled out 3 of the body maps that I thought kind of touched on some of the biggest themes that I found most interesting. Obviously, each story is so unique and different, you can't generalize an entire culture or area, but pulled out some themes that I liked. So Zandile, she was 16 years old. All these names have been changed as well, but they're still Zulu names. So she was 16, she was really, really shy. But if you look closely at her body map, she has a frown and tears coming down her face. And I wanted to bring hers up because it talked about the topic of virginity. This was something that came up almost with every single person, largely because I would ask if they had used tampons before. And I did not find one person that had ever used a tampon while I was there. And the reasoning was that most people believed it would either make you appear as if you had lost your virginity, or it would actually make you lose your virginity. And this is traced back to a traditional cultural practice known as virginity testing. We learned about this in our class. It saw a resurgence in the 90s with the rise of HIV. And the idea is that an elderly woman, usually a Sangoma, the healer, in the community would visualize the hymen of young girls to ensure that they had abstained from sex in an effort to protect themselves not only from pregnancy, but also from HIV. Learning about this in class, all of us kind of had like a big reaction to it, like that's not okay. Ethically, we saw a lot of issues with it. And there are, if you look at it. But ultimately, that's not really the point of me bringing it up today. Because I found that these girls would talk about it, and something that I saw kind of questionable was something that they took a lot of pride in their culture. For them, it was a chance to stand up and say, this is my body, I've taken control over it, I own my body. And that was something that was so important to them. And virginity testing was also usually paired with cultural singing and dancing and beautiful beaded outfits. So it was a really cool chance to get a different perspective on something that I had kind of reacted to without knowing the whole story. So this is Sitanda. She was my neighbor. She was the granddaughter of Gogo, the healer. And so not surprisingly, she brought up the topic of traditional healing. And she talked about some of the things that her Gogo had told her she should not do when she's menstruating. One of those be enter the Esigotweni, which is the Zulu word for traditional healing hut, where Gogo would communicate with the ancestors and make her herbal medicines. Another would be not to cook for males in her family, otherwise they would become ill with what kind of sounded like menstrual cramps. Another girl said she was told she couldn't braid. A lot of girls were told just to stay away from boys in general. So there are a lot of different things that varied greatly depending on the specific family that they had been raised in, and especially Sitanda, being raised by a Sangoma, definitely held some of these stronger beliefs. So this is Gogo's Essie Goldwayne. This is where I went with her to conduct my interview with her, which was really cool. The inside is awesome, has like dried herbs and everything hung around the inside of it. So she kind of talked about a duality of menstruation that is actually talked about a lot around the world, and that being that on one hand, it's obviously a really important, vital part of life for women, and if you don't start your period, then that's worrisome and something is wrong. But on the other hand, it's seen as something dirty and something that you should not be talking about openly. So she presented that in a way saying that young girls, when they first get their period, they're to stay hushed, stay quiet, stay inside, don't tell their father, but their mother will tell the father. And then after that, once the father knows, it becomes a big celebration, because if a young girl does not begin her period, then that's seen as a curse on the family. So I thought that was an interesting example of kind of the duality of menstruation and that reality for them. This is Bembe. This is my favorite body math. So Bembe was a very confident young woman. She jumped right into the body mapping session. A lot of the other girls were kind of like, oh, I don't really know what this is, but Bembe was just like going for it with the red paint. So above her head it says, thank God I've started my periods. And so she kind of touched a lot on just the pride she had in being a young woman. And obviously when you start your period, that is a sign that you are fertile and most likely will be able to bear children in the future. And I found that in this area, it was a really important thing to a lot of young women. That was kind of the expectation, that you're gonna have kids, you're gonna start a family. And honestly, that was so well respected. The mamas in this area, when I first moved to Durban, I was told if you're ever lost, you find a mama and she will get you home, and she got me home. And so it's something that is really well respected and something that these girls really look forward to. So to start your period and know that that's a possibility for your future was something that they were really proud of. So this is my classmate and I in our little honeymoon suite in Coastal Village for that month. So after 3 weeks of talking to these girls, chasing down consent forms, I moved back to Durban and was faced with the task of compiling it into one cohesive project. And as I mentioned, this was really difficult just because every story was so unique. You know, South Africa is at an intersection with the democracy post-apartheid, but there's still so many traditional courts and cultures that are kind of coming to a head. So there's kind of like a spectrum of where someone would fall with those beliefs. So each story was really, really unique. So my advisor suggested that I take a step back, look inwardly at my own experiences to figure out the bias and the lens through which I viewed these girls' experiences. And at first I was like, hell no, too personal, not doing this. And then I kind of, came to terms with the fact that that was exactly what I had just asked all these girls in their home to do with me, a stranger from America. So I started reflecting on it, and I realized that honestly the bias I went in with was that being a young woman from the United States, that for some reason I had a much more progressive, better, healthier view on women's health and on my period in general. And that for some reason these girls were at a disadvantage because of where they were from. And to be honest, that's not the case. Yes, a lot of them were obviously so scared when they first started their period, didn't really maybe understand what was going on, but they were also so proud. Like you saw Bembe's body map, it was something they took a lot of pride in and had a lot of confidence as they matured into young women, and I honestly don't really think that's something that I experienced at their age. So yes, there were a lot of differences, mostly stemming in the traditional belief area that they were talking about, but to be honest, those traditional beliefs were very small parts of their stories. They're the parts that stuck out to me and that I focused on because those are the parts that were different. Those are the parts that were interesting and new to me. But in reality, the stories that they told me, Zandile talking about seeing blood in her underwear and being so scared, Amanda talking about being in school and wanting to play sports during recess, but being so afraid to, because what if she stood up and then she bled through her underwear and through her pants? Or Sitanda talking about walking home from school and being so upset that she had bled through her uniform and she felt like everyone was watching her. So through those stories, I kind of started to see my own. When I first started my period and saw blood in my underwear, I was a very dramatic child, disclaimer, but I freaked out and my mother had to talk me down. I thought I was dying. So, and then 7th grade, I was in the band, and first period had my new blue and white Aeropostale Bermuda shorts on, and stood up and had bled through and was absolutely mortified. And so the logical thing to do for 7th grade me in this situation was to be like, guys, it's ketchup. I sat in ketchup, obviously. And that's what I told people because, because to me, that was so much better than admitting that I had my period and I had blood through my pants. And obviously that was middle school, but honestly to this day, like if I'm sitting in class and I have my period and I need to go to the bathroom and change a tampon, I'll stick my hand in my backpack, flick a tampon up my sleeve so no one sees, do a little like, and you know what I'm talking about, everyone does it. And because like God forbid someone think that not only do you have to go to the bathroom, you also have your period. So all these differences, or all these similarities rather, started to really stick out to me. And you know, despite the two seemingly different worlds that we had grown up in, we were women. And therefore we shared the common experience of menstruation. And we grew up with the idea that that was dirty and that was wrong and that we had to hide that. So ultimately this research left me with the question of why. Everyone has periods, all women rather, sorry. Sorry guys. All women menstruate. It's a healthy, normal, vital part of life if anyone wants to reproduce. So why is it something that we're told we shouldn't talk about it? Why is it such a hushed topic? I'd like to leave you with this quote from a book called The Wise Wound, which talks about the taboo nature of menstruation. And it is, it can, by asking these questions, contribute to a refusal to acquiesce in what appears to be a conspiracy of silence. And that's what I was hoping to do with this research project and on some small scale today with all of you, to stand up and speak openly and honestly about something that goes largely unspoken, and to try and help in some small way to open a conversation about not only specifically menstruation, but the importance of women's health issues in general. So thank you for being a part of that with me, and thank you for listening.